Hello everyone, I'm Terry Duke, and welcome to Duke It Out. Today we're going to be talking about politically moderate Metatron once again. Over the past 2 years now, I made a couple of video essays going over his content, essentially debunking a lot of misinformation, while also showing how his content has gotten worse, both in terms of research and quality, and more right-wing in terms of bias and framing. Before we get into the video though, I have a confession to make. For a while now, I've had a guilty pleasure in occasionally going to Twitter, a website I never use otherwise, if only to look at some of Metatron's hottest political takes, since he tends to be more open with them on Twitter. For example, last summer he suggested that if you burn the American flag, you should be sent away. So much for freedom of speech, you right-leaning moderate. But while writing the script for this video, a recent tweet of his got my attention, or at least it was recent when I wrote this part in. I've been procrastinating this video for a while. But this one post, I feel, perfectly encapsulates my core criticisms of Metatron's content. So, for context, there was this series released on Netflix in March called Adolescence, which is about a 13-year-old boy being arrested for murder. When the series was released, Metatron went to Twitter and wrote this essay. To paraphrase it, Metatron says he read on Twitter that Adolescence is not only based on a true story, but the real murder it's based on was committed by a black teenager, while the Netflix series features a white teenager. From there, he went into his usual spiel about race swapping and how it's bad no matter what sides it comes from, and saying that if they indeed whitewashed the character, then that's bad. However, that was just an allegation he read about on Twitter, and so here he is, again on Twitter, asking strangers online to help him verify this claim. And if reading this, you thought to yourself, well, couldn't he just Google it to find the answer? Well, yes, he could, and that's exactly what I did. So I went on Google and I asked, is Adolescence based on a true story? And there we go. It's inspired by a series of stabbings in the UK, but the story itself is completely fictional. So that took what, like 5 seconds? So why is Metatron, the truth crusader as I've been getting used to calling him, the I have a team of academics that peer review my videos guy, asking on Twitter for clarification when looking it up himself would have saved him more time? Well, the most obvious answer to me is he tends to be selectively very lazy and dumb, but if I was doing an armchair psychology bit though, I would argue that Metatron is so full of this perceived image he has of himself, this character that he's built as the last fighter for the truth, the guy who tells it like it is no matter who it offends, that this tweet was more about reaffirming his persona and enjoying the words coming out of his mouth than actually talking about the topic at hand or even fact-checking it. Either way, the only thing to retain from this tweet isn't Metatron's views on diversity in the media, it's that he had a question he could have easily answered himself in 5 seconds, but didn't because he was too lazy to Google. And with that, today's video is about Metatron's review of The Woman King, my first essay in which I criticized the video, and Metatron's subsequent response to it. So if you don't know about any of these videos, or you don't know anything about me and my previous essays on Metatron, well, here's a brief summary of my exchanges, and how he made a response to me without mentioning me directly. So a few months ago, I made my 4th essay on Metatron, to which he responded to me in the comment section, essentially to tell me that he would not be making a response video because he didn't want to flood my considerably smaller channel with hate comments, something a much bigger channel could not fully prevent. But then, amongst my many criticisms at the time, I also called him a right-wing grifter, and he really didn't like that. So even if I didn't care that my channel would get flooded with his audience, he still wouldn't do it because of the grifter accusation. And when I also argued that he actually lied in some of his content, he took it as one insult too far and used it as an out to not have to address anything further. Now officially, that's the out that Metatron gave himself so as to not have to respond to any and all criticisms I've ever levied against him. But if I could speculate for a minute, I would argue that the real reason is because he's objectively wrong. And I'm not even saying this as some kind of debate bro trying to destroy another YouTuber with facts and logic just for the sake of owning them. It is a fact that Metatron has misled his audience multiple times. It is also a fact that a lot of his research has been very lazy and misleading. And it is also a fact, as I've demonstrated, that Metatron isn't as apolitical or moderate as he claims to be. And if his audience knew that, he would lose a lot of credibility. Certainly the whole image of being all about the facts, doing the research to get to the historical truth, and being apolitical would fall apart when it's demonstrated, as I have done, that he's none of those things. But again, that's just how I see it. If we take him at his word, it's because I called him a grifter and a liar, and for him, that's just rude, therefore he won't engage. Now, of course, the problem with this excuse is that it's also become demonstrably false as well since he made that comment, as just a few months after our exchanges, he got into another beef with another YouTuber called Bad Empanada. Now, Bad Empanada is another political YouTuber who made a video on Metatron, which, according to Metatron himself, again on Twitter, insulted him throughout the video, used all sorts of ad hominem, slandered his name, and lied about his qualifications. This was apparently such a vicious video that Metatron was prompted to make a response video to it immediately and published it the very next day. And similarly, just recently, Metatron also responded to another YouTuber called Alec Gunter, because the latter called him a Nazi and a fascist, among other things. Now for the record, I do like Alec Gunter. I saw his debate with Matt Walsh and I thought that was pretty hilarious. As for Bad Empanada, I don't really watch him. My understanding is that he makes a lot of good essays, but outside of that, he's just completely unhinged, so I don't want to associate with him. But my point is, if Metatron didn't want to respond to me because I was rude, then why did he bother responding to Bad Empanada and Alec Gunter, who were also very rude? Is it possible that Metatron changed his stance on responding to videos that are insulting him? After all, Metatron isn't exactly a good example of civil discourse either, at least not anymore. Again, going to his Twitter, he loves telling people they have low IQs now. This one here was just a comment telling him his channel is right-wing, and Metatron went straight to calling this commenter a Neanderthal and sharing the comment to his Twitter account so his audience on there would make fun of the guy. Way to show, Metatron, that you only ever engage in civil discourse. But I digress. Maybe my mistake was that I did not insult him hard enough? Do I need to drag his good name in the mud for him to prepare the shield wall with his noble ones? Or, just hear me out. Is it possible that Metatron is actually a hypocrite and a coward who felt he could more easily respond to the frivolous, unscripted ramblings of a few live streamers, whereas my accusations and criticisms are a lot more researched, better presented, and harder to respond to? Keep in mind that Alec Gunter and Bad Empanada are also much larger YouTubers than me and probably harder to ignore than me, but the point here stays the same. If Metatron didn't want to respond to me because of the insults, by responding to these guys, he proved himself that this is not a real standard that he holds consistently. And then his Twitter is further proof that he doesn't actually care about civility, at least not consistently. With that being said, while Metatron didn't want to respond to me directly, he still did indirectly a few months ago. You see, when I was arguing with Metatron in my comments, and he said he didn't want to make a response because of the insults I sprinkled there and there, I actually gave him an alternative. I said that if he sincerely cares about the objective truth, as he claimed countless times in his videos, but isn't willing to debate me or respond to me to get to the truth, then he has my blessing to respond to all of my criticisms without ever mentioning me directly. And so, that's exactly what he did. A few months ago, Metatron released a video titled, I Doubled Down. In this video, he went over an older video of his, the one he did on the Woman King movie, to see if he still stands by the arguments he made in his original review.
About 2 years ago, I made a video. To be specific, this video here called The Woman King Exposed Propaganda Lies versus Historical Truth. Anyways, it's been 2 years, I don't exactly remember what I said, so how about we check it together and we see if there's something I need to correct, because if I said something wrong, you know, I should admit it. So let's do that. Let me tell you, however, that if I did not say something wrong, I'm gonna double down. I'm gonna double down.
Now, for the few who have watched my videos, you will know that Metatron's video on the Woman King is at the core of my first official essay on him, because of how obviously bad and biased the video was. And while he never mentions me by name in his Double Down video, they are signs.
Okay, so this is an interesting sector because another channel, I'm not gonna say his name because I don't want you guys to go and gang up on him against him, because he has made quite a few videos criticizing me, but not in a very good way, I'll be honest with you, mate. Like, sometimes you bring up good points, but other times...
Before we go further though, can we talk about how funny that is? I didn't actually expect Metatron to make a response and just leave me out of it, but the fact that he did, like, dude, if you're not afraid of platforming people who were harsh to you, then what's so scary about mentioning me at all? Don't tell me it's because I specifically called you a grifter and a liar, because by leaving me out of it, you were free to ignore those accusations completely, and you still brought them up in your video.
Yeah, right-wing grifter. I mean, particularly the people that call me a liar, I think they are the weakest, intellectually, culturally, and from an educational standpoint.
So essentially, this is as close a response as we'll likely ever get from him. And today's video is specifically about that. Sure, his review of The Woman King is like 2-3 years old now, and my response to it is also fairly old by now, but if Metatron is going to look at this video again today and still make the exact same points, he's going to double down, then the criticisms I've made in my older video are still relevant as well. And since he's going over his older video as a way of saying if he still stands by it, I can actually do the same thing with my older videos, so it's gonna be a learning experience for everyone. That being said, before we get into anything, I don't feel like keeping this as a surprise for the end, so I'll just say it now, so you know it's coming. One of my primary arguments against Metatron's review of The Woman King is that he had not watched the film. This is not something I actually knew for sure when making my video, however, his summary of the film was so incorrect as to what the movie actually was, that it was the only logical explanation I could reach, and Metatron, in his response, does admit towards the end that he never actually watched The Woman King when he made his review on it.
Did I single-handedly watch the entire movie? No, I didn't, and there is nothing wrong with that.
So that's that. However, everything he says leading up to that point, and how he explains away not watching the movie, both are critical to really understand Metatron's flat-out dishonesty. And fundamentally, that's what my video really is about. It's easy to think that Metatron's review of The Woman King is just one video covering a somewhat forgotten movie from 3 years ago and that it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, but what I want you to keep in mind throughout this video is that Metatron's review of The Woman King is just one video out of several hundred that he's produced since then. In the end, a lot of Metatron's arguments are rendered null and void by the mere fact that he hasn't watched the movie and doesn't know what he's talking about, so doubling down on the arguments in this context means doubling down on the laziness and arrogance. And so while I am to address his arguments regardless, the overall point of my video isn't exclusively that Metatron's review and subsequent response were bad, it's more about making a statement on his channel as a whole, whether he truly believes what he says or doesn't, whether he has a real team of academics behind him or not. Saying how Metatron responded to me here and how he reflects on his older takes should make everyone question just how deep all of this goes, and the answer is likely much deeper than you think. And with this ridiculously long intro, we can now get into it. First, we'll start with a review of The Woman King to remind everybody of what that movie was. Then I'll do a quick recap of what Metatron's arguments were, and what mine were in return. Then we'll go over his newer video to see what he has to say about it now. And with that, let's talk about The Woman King. So, The Woman King was a historical, epic, action drama film released in 2022 that centers on the African kingdom of Dahomey, as well as the Agoji, the all-female military group from that kingdom that really did exist historically. The movie takes place in the 1820s, and this is important to emphasize here, it's a largely fictionalized retelling of how the kingdom of Dahomey broke free from a larger rival nation, the Oyo Empire. Now, before I get into reviewing the movie, I just want to make it clear that my defense of it is only insofar as to defend it from the mischaracterization it received, not just from Metatron, but from the online right as a whole. And I'm gonna get into all of that, but as far as how I personally feel about The Woman King, it was an okay movie. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't great either. The Woman King, despite having an undeniably very refreshing setting, covering a part of history that we don't know much about, and having an interesting intrigue as well as a great cast, ultimately it mostly felt like an action movie. Like, if I had to vaguely compare it with other movies, The Woman King is closer in its aesthetics to something like Wonder Woman. The point was to have badass female warriors being the heroes and kicking some ass, just not with the superpowers in this case. And this became clear to me like right at the beginning. From their suits alone in the first scene, the Dahomey Amazons look a lot more like the DC Amazons than what they actually looked like historically. And a lot of their fighting style is over the top and flamboyant, like they're the 300 Spartans in a graphic novel or something. And really, that's the core of this movie. Sure, it's the kingdom of Dahomey, and there's a few interesting intrigues and rivalries, but mostly female warriors, epic fights, epic battles, and the historical setting is more of a pretext to bring those warriors to life as opposed to actually telling something about their history. But unfortunately, that was also the point. The Woman King wasn't meant to be a huge historical epic that would dare to explore serious themes like slavery. At least, that's how it was from the perspective of the studio. They only care about their bottom line, so this meant that The Woman King was gonna be designed as an action movie to attract as large an audience as possible by being something that would be relatively easy to digest with simple themes such as fighting for freedom and fighting for revenge. And the real challenge ultimately was that this type of movie that you've seen plenty of times before, this time it wouldn't be in a recognizable setting like North America or Europe with white actors. This time it would be a movie set in Africa with black actors telling a part of African history. That was the main cultural barrier that The Woman King was trying to break by merely being produced. And before I get into that aspect, I just want to say that on its own, that's my main issue with the movie. It clearly suffered from a clash between the artistic direction trying to do something bold and the Hollywood studio just trying to maximize profits. This led the themes in the movie to be washed out and inconsistent. For example, let's bring the elephant in the room: slavery. A lot of the criticisms of the movie revolved around the fact that, historically, the Kingdom of Dahomey was one of the biggest slaver nations at the time, and the criticism was that the Woman King basically ignores all of that to instead glorify the Agoge. But that was never really true, because the characters in the movie do acknowledge that they practice slavery, so that was always a disingenuous mischaracterization by people who'd never seen it. But I'd also be lying if I said that the depiction itself wasn't, thematically, all over the place. For example, the very first fight in the movie occurs when Oyo soldiers capture the Dahomey people, and the Agoge are sent to rescue them. And after they succeed and head back, they are seen as heroes. You know, those people were about to have their families taken away from them, but the Agoge showed up and saved the day. They are saviors. That's great and all, but if the characters acknowledge that they also practice slavery, then that would imply that when the Agoge aren't saving their own from being enslaved, they're just doing the exact same thing to the Oyo as the Oyo are doing to them. So when you take that into account, it does make the vague notion of fighting for freedom against the Oyo Empire feel sort of empty. Because while they are fighting for freedom from the Oyo Empire's grip, as a nation, they're still practicing slavery. Now, I don't mind it as an internal contradiction, but it has to be addressed in some way. The problem is that by trying to have a straightforward narrative for a profitable action movie, they needed a clear good guy and a clear bad guy. So the elements that make the story more complicated than simply good Agoge, bad Oyo are essentially ignored throughout the film, and it just feels too simplistic. That being said, it's not the first, nor is it the last movie to play it safe with its thematics, but again, the point of the movie, at least for the studio, was to make as much money as possible while also breaking a big taboo. The cultural taboo being, in this case, the belief that a movie set in Africa, covering African history with black actors, could not be profitable. For context, it took several years for The Woman King to finally be produced. According to leading actress and producer Viola Davis, she said the movie was turned down many times for several years for that very reason, with some studios considering to make the movie, but only with a lighter-skinned cast. So, on a side note, how do you like that for woke Hollywood? Lots of people complaining that The Woman King was woke, a DEI film or something. Meanwhile, Hollywood actually thought The Woman King could not work if the cast was too dark. So, where did that taboo come from, that movies in Africa can't succeed? Well, in short, it's racism. Whether it's the studios themselves being racist or the fact that a majority white audience isn't likely to watch movies that primarily feature black actors, black stories, and black themes, both can be true. Now, some people I've debated on this issue were quick to point out movies like Black Panther and be like, see, this movie was immensely successful, and it was black people in Africa. And that's true, but that's not the full picture either. Black Panther wasn't just Black Panther. It was a Marvel movie, part of the globally successful MCU. It was actually the 18th film being released and the first with a black lead character. For comparison, that would be like if I uploaded this video on MrBeast's channel, and because it got several million views over there, it would be taken as an indication that I can make millions of views with videos like these. That's just not how it works. So if you really want to see if the success of Black Panther can be repeated, you'd have to make a movie in Africa with black actors, but completely separate from the MCU. And that's exactly what The Woman King was. In fact, Sony only produced it after they saw the success of Black Panther. And what happened? Well, without the MCU behind it, white nerds just didn't watch it as much. And a lot of them, in fact, were very quick to not only not watch it, but take every opportunity to trash it and mischaracterize it, especially on the online right, which turned a lot of people against the film, despite most of what was being said about it not being true. Now, to be clear, I don't want to put all the blame on the audience here either. The movie did not help itself by choosing the Kingdom of Dahomey as its setting. It was bound to be criticized for it. That being said, there's fair criticisms of the historical accuracy, and there's using the argument as an excuse to trash a movie because you don't like movies with lots of black people in them. Both of which happened. So ultimately, The Woman King was meant to break the notion that movies set in Africa can't be successful, but it did so by playing it safe with its thematics and dumbing down the history quite a lot in favor of making an easy-to-digest action film. Either you didn't care about the inaccuracies and you had a fun experience, or you cared about the history and didn't like the movie, or you just had some biases and you were not going to watch it either way. At the end of the day, the movie was actually fairly well received by critics, but the box office performance and the lack of other similar movies since then would suggest that with its broader goal, The Woman King failed, although I'm sure more attempts will be made in the future. And that's really about it. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that can be discussed surrounding the movie, but I think mostly it was just misrepresented and blown out of proportion. And those are my thoughts on the movie. And so with that, let's bring it back to Metatron. Metatron's review of The Woman King was, for me, the first clear red flag that he was being racist and disingenuous on his channel. You see, when Metatron first started to lean right in his content, it was usually on the topic of diverse castings in historical movies. You know, Black Vikings, Black Romans, sometimes White Mongolians, but mostly Black Romans. That's what he would mostly focus on. But at the risk of being called a racist, Metatron always had an easy out of the accusation. It's not that he's racist, it's that he doesn't like historical accuracy. And hey, you know what would be a great solution to that? It's if black actors could make movies in Africa, telling African history, instead of casting them in Eurocentric films. And not only would Metatron not complain about it, he would endorse it, he would encourage it, and he would watch it. That was always his main argument, but short of an actual movie or series coming out for him to practice what he preached, it was just words, it didn't really mean anything. But then The Woman King came out, and he made his video on it, utterly trashing it for pushing political propaganda and whatnot. However, I had seen the movie, and upon watching Metatron's review of it, I quickly realized he had no idea what he was talking about. Metatron, throughout his video, described the movie as being the good Kingdom of Dahomey against the evil white Europeans. He summed up this movie this way 3 times, without giving it a second thought, even though, as I said, the bad guys in the movie are the Oyo Empire. So like, how do you watch a movie and get the bad guys wrong 3 times so confidently? Either you're really dumb, or you didn't watch it. So by suggesting he hadn't watched it, I was essentially saying, Metatron isn't stupid, he's just lazy. Either way though, I think we can agree that it looks really bad, right? Metatron, the history guy who does all kinds of research into historical sword fighting and armors and history, who's passionate about all of this stuff. If you watch this content and came out thinking Metatron knows his stuff and does the necessary research for this content, I wouldn't blame you. And if he made a review on a movie, you would also assume similarly that Metatron would have watched it and is giving you accurate information as well as an informed opinion. So what happens then when you realize that he's just lazy and made a video to talk about a movie he didn't watch and mischaracterized it to hundreds of thousands of people? And what does it say of his racial bias? Like, I don't like diversity in historical movies because it's inaccurate, but hey, if they make movies in Africa, that'd be great. Except if they do, I won't watch it and trash it anyway. To be clear, if Metatron had seen the movie and not enjoyed it, that would be okay. But the fact that he couldn't even be bothered to do the basic research of just watching it and still made a video on it is a level of laziness and dishonesty that is completely contrary to everything Metatron claims to stand for. You know, objectivity, facts, fairness. Apparently, those don't always apply, it seems. So that was the gist of it. Metatron's argument was that The Woman King was bad because it glorified the Kingdom of Dahomey while vilifying white Europeans. My argument was that he had no idea what he was talking about because he didn't watch the film, and as such, he's a hack who should not be trusted to present information truthfully. And with that said, let's now get into Metatron's latest video on the topic, I Double Down. I'm not going to go over the entire video as it's pretty long as it is, so I'll stick to the main points, but the link is in the description, so feel free to watch his videos to make sure I don't misrepresent them. And as I've said, since this is also an opportunity to review my own video on the topic, we'll start on the right foot by me being the first to concede a point.
And I know what you was thinking.
Yeah.
It's probably like white supremacists that want the film cancelled, right? Because of the mostly black cast. No. It's actually black people that are mad, and rightly so.
Backlash from the black community.
Okay, so this is an interesting sector because another channel, I'm not gonna say his name because I don't want you guys to go and gang up on him against him because he has made quite a few videos. He was offended by the fact that I am now, in this video, I was showing a content creator like Black Conservative because he's a right-winger. I mean, he's like, oh, look, Metatron, it's problematic that he watches these kind of creators, which to me is insane because I said publicly multiple times that I watch creators on the left and the right because I enjoy doing that and there is nothing wrong and I will not be intimidated by the guilty by association mentality, which is a cancer. And I do not use that word lightly. And not to mention this coming from someone who says my opinions are racist and then he tells me I shouldn't watch a black YouTuber because okay.
Alright, so this segment here is in direct reference to the fact that in my first essay, I pointed out that all the black people Metatron references are actually black conservative pundits. I wasn't offended though, nor did I suggest that it was problematic in of itself. The reason I pointed it out is because Metatron himself claims to be apolitical, or at least a moderate, and so, you can say you watch content from both sides all you want, but virtually all of your sources here are right-wing, and that alone shows a bias to the contrary. I mean, one of them is affiliated with PragerU, which, if you're an academic, you should never be citing. However, while that is bad, the main problem was the framing itself. The whole point of this little segment where Metatron shows black people criticizing the movie was for him to say, like, before you call me racist for not liking this movie, look at all those black people who don't like it either. And I even play with that notion, essentially saying that if that's the intellectual level we're playing on, I can do it too. So if Metatron has some right-wing black people that agree with him, well, here's a black leftist that calls all your black conservatives dishonest grifters. But that's really about it. The point was, you can't claim to be politically moderate if all your sources are right-wing. Not to mention how gauche it is to just say I can't be racist because these black people agree with me. But the reason I'm conceding the argument nonetheless is because while I accused Metatron of citing people that merely agree with him on that point without checking if they are even a reliable source, is because in my own video, I'm guilty of doing the exact same thing. In a later segment talking about something else, I suggested that if people want a more thorough response to Metatron, specifically when it comes to the historical arguments, they could check a response video by another YouTuber called Kuelimika. This YouTuber did make a response to Metatron that I felt was compelling, but I never bothered to check the rest of his channel, and as it turned out, he was an Afrocentrist, which isn't exactly reliable either. If I took the time to really look into who Kuelimika was, I would not have cited him. Going back to this, I don't think Metatron citing these pundits to make his argument was good, because they're clearly biased, but I also cited an Afrocentrist without really making an effort to see if they were a reliable source either, so given that, I'll take the L on that one, and we can move on.
As always, in order to do a professional job, we need to set aside our emotions and use logic and reason to assess and analyze the situation.
Absolutely, nobody cares about feelings when we're talking about history, it's facts. Full stop. It doesn't matter what political propaganda it dismantles, it really doesn't matter where it comes from, as long as we stick to the facts.
So again, I just want to remind you that Metatron did not watch the film when he made that video, and was mostly describing what he felt the movie was about. So keep that in mind.
The one thing that I can say right off the bat, which unfortunately is one of the very few good things I can say about this movie, is that at least it's a step in the right direction when it comes to the setting, or it would have been if they had done it right.
Yeah, shut up, Metatron. So basically what I'm saying here is the idea that I was happy that they were setting a movie with black actors into Africa, making it therefore correctly placed when it comes to the racial or ethnic component. Once again, I agree with my past self in this case, and I want to just sort of underline the fact that whenever you do a race swapping, it doesn't matter if you do it for representation, it doesn't matter if you do it for inclusivity, you're still doing a disservice to both. Not only the people that are being changed, because if someone was white, it was white, if someone was black, it was black, it is what it is, but you're also doing a disservice to the people that you are injecting into someone else's history, because at the end of the day, you're kind of downplaying their history, which is why, at least when it comes to the setting, I was happy with The Woman King. Stupidest title ever, by the way.
This is something that I'd actually really like to debate with Metatron, because there are so many ways to unpack this argument. So like, sure, if you think introducing diversity into historical movies does a disservice to people of color's history, okay, that's an argument. And if you believe as such that people of color should have the opportunity to tell their own stories, I'd say that's logically consistent. And I mean, credit where credit's due, Metatron has acknowledged in the past that those big media companies only care about making money, and so there won't be a real, genuine attempt at making more diverse stories unless they feel it will be profitable. So like, everything I said about that earlier is something that Metatron has also acknowledged to a degree. The problem is, he doesn't seem to understand how his rhetoric is also part of that problem. You can argue you want more movies in Africa all you want, but if then when they do make those movies, you don't watch them, and instead mischaracterize them to your audience, not only are you assuring that such movies will be less successful, you're also actively working against them now. And again, if Metatron had watched it and didn't like it, and wanted to make a well thought out critique, that'd be totally fine. The point is, he didn't do that. He didn't watch it, but still made a video on it, which in turn suggests that when he claims to want more movies in Africa, he's not that sincere about it. The talk doesn't mean anything if you don't walk the walk.
You see, the problem with this is the following. You either choose as producers, a position of, well, it's fiction, lightly historically inspired fiction, but it is fiction, so we took massive liberties, and therefore you can't really be mad at us. Go do your own research. That's one approach you can take. Or you can take the other approach, which we have just witnessed, the one where the actress says,
I think the reason why The Woman King is important is because it's historical and it's real. Because it's historical and it's real.
These two statements are mutually exclusive, ladies and gentlemen. You either say that what defines the movie, the production, and the general blueprint that they followed is that, yeah, we wanted to take a little bit of a historically inspired series or story, but it's highly fictional, so cut us some slack. That's one. Or you say that what defines the movie and makes it important is the fact that it's historical and real. Because they chose the latter, I went down with it, and I do not apologize for it. I stand firm.
And here we're already starting to see cracks in the ship. By which I mean, this is an argument I addressed in my first response, and presumably it just flew over Metatron's head. So as he just said, you can either approach the movie as historical fiction, or you can say it's historical and it's real, but it can't be both. But Metatron is also adding here that historical and real is the words that the actress chose, so that's what he's just going with. And to this, I'll just replay my old segment since he ignored it. Did the producers or anyone involved ever claim that the movie was meant to be as accurate as possible? No. So where is he getting this idea that the movie even has an agenda at all? The only possible source he presents is a 4-second clip of one of the actresses saying the movie is important because it's historical and it's real. But without further context, this is a sentence that could also be said of even the most loosely based historical movies or shows made anywhere. And this actress did not produce the film, she only played in it and is not in a position to speak to the intent of the writers and producers. So like, sure, this actress can say it's historical and real, but regardless of how you interpret that, because it's a 5-second clip out of context, she's still just the actress. If the producers say it's historical fiction, I would argue their words have more weight on the matter. But that's also not the entire clip. I actually had a really hard time finding the interview when making my first essay, but I did find it this time around to get the full context, and I left a link for it in the description. But the problem with that interview, though, is that it's short, and the quote by that actress is right at the beginning, and she never speaks again in the entire interview. So we don't even know what she was asked, in what context she was saying it, we have no idea. But as I understand it, this is the same point I was making earlier while I was reviewing the movie myself, which is that culturally, we don't get a lot of historical movies set in Africa with black actors telling their own history, so having a movie that does that, however loosely, is not something that happens often, therefore it's a pretty big deal. It's the sentiment being shared by everyone else throughout the interview, and that just leaves us with a question, which is, what does it mean for a movie to be historical and real? It might sound ridiculous to ask the question, but we're talking about historical fiction here, and to the extent that historical fiction takes a historical setting, real characters, and depicts real event, technically they're historical and real, even if they dramatize a lot of it. That's the logic for historical fiction. So to the extent, for example, that William Wallace did exist, you can make the argument that Braveheart is historical and real, even if it gets a lot of stuff wrong. To the extent that the Spartans did exist, and did fight the Persians at Thermopylae, you could also say that 300 is historical and real, even if everything else about it is completely over the top. And to the extent that the Agoge did exist, The Woman King is also historical and real. So the idea that a movie can either be fictional or historical, but not both, because of a 5-second clip out of context from an actress that just says the words historical and real, I think relying on that clip to make your argument is pretty disingenuous. And again, even if she said it literally, for Metatron's entire argument to hold, he has to purposefully take her word as an actress over that of the writers, producers, and director, who have all been quoted many times saying that it's historical fiction. So the argument is really lazy, on top of being disingenuous.
Based on a true story. Well, we really need to talk about the word true here. So, too long didn't read version, the premise is great, the execution is horrible. It feels like this film's script has been generated by an AI trying to make the highest money return possible off a current trend in the shallowest and most disconnected way possible.
Hold on a minute, Metatron. I'd like to underline that Viola Davis agrees with me when it comes to the money component. Let me show you.
Well, this part here kind of goes into what I said about the movie myself. There was an obvious clash between the movie itself and how Hollywood wanted to make it more profitable. The movie did play it safe with the thematics, that is true. But given the fact that he had not seen the movie and couldn't possibly know anything about it, looking at the video now, he was mostly right about the cash grab by accident. Although I would disagree it was like a really bad film written by AI, because again, the film was okay, and as I've said, the critics received it fairly positively. So in the next part of the video, he quickly goes over one of the articles that he covers at some point in the older video as well, but we'll get back to it when he really talks about it, because it gets more interesting. So moving on.
The reason why I think this film failed miserably, dear Viola Davis, regardless of how much money it actually ends up making, is because the film is not about the fidelity of the historical events. It never was.
It never was. The reason why I think the film failed when it comes to being historical and real, it's because the protagonist, Naniska, is an anti-slavery freedom fighter. She's brought up in this culture, and yet she is the most motivated anti-slavery freedom fighter ever. They say it multiple times that they are the blade of freedom. So she's telling all of these other women warriors who once again belong to the kingdom of Dahomey, and they were brought up in the culture, and they all agree with her. In fact, they are so inspired by this freedom, because the ancestors want this. Ancestors of what? Of what culture are we talking about? Because this is a kingdom that was tip of the spear, end of the line, edge of the blade when it comes to taking slaves. That's a historical fact. That's why the title of my video is that it's Propaganda Lies versus Historical Truth.
So again, there's a lot of problems with Metatron's argument here. First off, yes, they were slavers, and again, the movie acknowledges it. And some of the Agoji were slave. That is also true. This is also something that the movie depicts, something you wouldn't know if you'd seen it. So the movie isn't perfect, but it didn't completely shy away from slavery either. But the next part, like this idea that the main character being anti-slavery is too fantastical to suspend disbelief, like, really, dude? For you, the idea that people can't have diverging opinions if there's a main culture in place, that's just not possible? So really, you're doubling down on just not thinking through your positions here. You can look at any time in history. There's never been a single instance where everyone in the society, culture, or civilization all agreed on everything. Never happened. You can find Nazis that disagreed with the Holocaust. You can find Russian communists that disagreed with the Soviets. You can find slave abolitionists in the southern states before the American Civil War. Even in the Middle Ages in Europe, where everyone would have been a religious fanatic, you could still find heretics. Similarly, not everyone in Dahomey would have been pro-slavery, regardless of what the state did. To suggest otherwise is just not thinking about it. That said, I do want to address this next part because it does get ridiculous.
Give me another African kingdom if you want to do that. You know what you should do? You should make a documentary or a movie, like I did, about the African warrior queen who fought against the Roman Empire. She fought against the invaders who were the ancient Romans. She fought well. It's a very interesting discussion that nobody knows about. These are freedom fighters against invaders. This is what it is.
So here we need to talk about freedom. See, the issue with Metatron when it comes to the Woman King is that he's conflating freedom from a rival state with freedom from slavery as an institution. Normally, I would say this is a media literacy issue in that Metatron is just not understanding the movie's plot, but it's not that he doesn't understand it, it's that he doesn't know it. When Naniska talks about freedom in the context of the movie, they're in the Dahomey Revolt, which is when the kingdom of Dahomey broke free from the grip of the larger, more powerful faction, the Oyo Empire. So regardless of how she personally feels about slavery, the freedom speech is about freedom from the Oyo. Now, could you say that talking about freedom when you also practice slavery is a contradiction? Of course! And it was, but those internal contradictions have existed in many shapes and forms throughout history. I mean, literally just take the United States, right? In the Declaration of Independence, they have this part where they say that they hold the self-evident belief that all men were created equal. And some of the founding fathers that signed this declaration were slave owners. And slavery stayed active in the US for nearly 100 years afterwards. So it is possible for a nation to say freedom for us, but not for our slaves, and that's partly what the Dahomey Revolt was about. But when Metatron brings up the Kandake, like, yeah, the kingdom of Kush fought against the Romans to keep their freedom, but they also practiced slavery, my guy. If you want to apply the same moral standards to the kingdom of Kush, it's literally the same internal contradiction. They fought for freedom against the Romans, but they also had their own slavery system. The only thing this tells me is that Metatron is fine with the movie on the Kandake, but not with the Woman King because I think he's just coming up with any excuse he can think of to justify not watching the movie, and as far as I can tell, he likes ancient Rome, not so much the 1800s, but that's all it is. Don't pretend that your preferred historical period is somewhat morally better if it literally shares the same problem.
I get it. Naniska, in her own specific story, she's a completely made-up character, and therefore she had her own horrible experience with being enslaved and all that. Great. Still the wrong kingdom. I'm just gonna double down on that. It would be like making a video about the Italian fascists and one of the highest generals, right arm of Benito Mussolini, is a pro-freedom, respect other people, let's not do a one-party system, I'm against dictatorial regime. This pacifist. Yeah, do you think that would fly? Tell me I'm wrong.
And again, here, I'll just point out to Oskar Schindler. He served Nazi Germany as military intelligence, he joined the party in 1939, and later he used his money to bribe Nazi officers to save his Jewish workers from the death camps, and he ended up saving over 1,000 of them. A Nazi party member who actively worked against the Nazis. It happened. It's a true story. There have been plenty of people within Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy who came to have a change of heart and do something about it. So if it happened historically, it wouldn't be far-fetched to create fictional characters either. So again, like for the third time, your argument only makes sense if you don't think about it. And all of this so far is before he even begins to talk about the plot. Now, this is where it starts to get funny.
The film is all about the kingdom of Dahomey and its warriors who need to liberate this good black kingdom from the evil white Europeans who want to take away their freedom.
Okay, when it comes to this one, I do have to admit that I did not make myself clear, and I have to readdress it because the way I presented it is not good. It's important to underline the fact that the main antagonist or the villain to the actual movie and the plot is not the white Europeans, the majority. So when it comes to the real villains, the antagonist, it's the other African kingdom. So the kingdom of Oyo. Why did I say it's a good black kingdom against bad white colonizers or invaders? If you watch the trailer, that is the sentiment you get. But as you watch the movie, and I will also answer the question whether I did watch it or not, stick around and I'll tell you that, since that is being called into question as well.
I mean, I already spoiled it, but you see how embarrassing this is getting. If you watch the movie, you could just say yes right there. The fact that you don't, and that you need to save it for later to explain it, you already gave the answer. But please, continue.
What I should have made a better effort to explain here is that my position of the movie suggesting or having a sort of anti-European sentiment was meant to be received as a subliminal component. I didn't mean that it was written as a main blatant plot point, but that it was hinted as a sort of dog whistle. I still believe that, and if you do, check out the trailer, you will get that feeling as you watch it. But I have to admit that I did not explain that that's what I meant when I produced the video, which of course created a little bit of backlash behind the scenes, which is totally fair. So to reiterate and clarify this point, I am well aware, and I made a mistake not explaining this, that the real full-on plot antagonist is the Kingdom of Oyo, but I should have explained that the whole idea of good indigenous versus bad white colonizers was subliminal. It was a subliminal point. That was my accusation.
Okay, so there you have it. He can't admit it properly. I feel perfectly confident calling out the bullshit here. This is just a Weasley attempt at playing down just how wrong he got the movie. He didn't mean it as a subliminal message. He just thought that's what the movie was from watching the trailer. And in the original review, he summarized the movie as the Europeans being the villains at least 3 times, in completely unambiguous terms. In fact, he didn't bring up the Oyo at all. So now, every time Metatron gets to these parts of the video, he has to sit there like, yeah, you know, subliminal message, my bad, lol. But what I also find funny, although granted I could be reaching here, although I don't think I am. But this entire video is essentially Metatron reacting on camera, right? The only time Metatron is off camera with stock footage playing is when he's explaining away why he framed the video so badly. Now, having seen a lot of Metatron content in the past, voiceover in stock footage has pretty much always been used in scripted videos, not reacts. So the fact that this is the only time in the entire 50-minute long video that he goes off camera to explain himself with stock footage, I suspect it's because he had to pause the video and actually type out a response because he couldn't come up with an excuse on the go. That's the impression I'm getting from this, and if it's true, it's both hilarious and sad. So He will admit later that he didn't watch the film, but he couldn't bite the bullet on the fact that because he didn't, he was completely wrong. Instead, he now has to pretend like he always knew the Oyo were the bad guys, even though he never mentions them while describing the movie in his original video. So yeah, I call bullshit on this one. Anyway, after summarizing the movie part, we're now coming back to the Viola Davis article, which I was talking about earlier.
Okay, so let me expand on that and let's check out the article about this, because another idea that really annoys me is this fixation with ethnicity. Check this out. Viola Davis says, according to star Viola Davis, any audience member who declines to financially support The Woman King and see the film in theaters is supporting the narrative that black women cannot lead the box office globally. This is called mental manipulation, by the way.
So this was another big part of Metatron's video on The Woman King, and the second big indicator for me of how lazy and disingenuous Metatron was being. In this part, Metatron was essentially railing against Viola Davis for supposedly saying that if people don't like the movie, it's because they're misogynist and racist. That's how he framed it in the original video, and there's a lot of problems with it. So here's the article that he's reading right now. This is the same as in the original video, and the first thing I want to point out here, as I did point out in my first video, is that if you scroll down to the second paragraph, it's a summary of the movie which names the villains, the Oyo Empire. What this means is that when Metatron made his first video and he read that article, he probably never made it past the headline, because if he had, he would have known that the bad guys aren't the white Europeans, like right here. With that sentence alone, he could have gotten away with not watching the movie, and it would have been a lot harder to tell. But now it also shows that he doesn't read the articles he cites either. Again, complete laziness, which I could forgive as an amateur mistake. I've made them too. But Metatron is all about the facts and the truth and doing the research and being an academic and having a team of academics. You can't talk about all of that and still be lazy like this, is my point. Read the stuff, Metatron. You are embarrassing yourself. But what also really annoys me though is the utter lack of self-reflection here. Like, dude, you argue black people should make movies in Africa, and when they manage to do it and say like, hey, we black people succeeded in making a movie in Africa, you criticize them for ethnic fixation?
But the other thing that I dislike about this is, notice this, black woman. The movie is not about history, it's about ethnicity and this specific. Let's continue. Lauding the film as a highlight of black excellence, once again, ethnic fixation, and other black-led movies, ethnic. Then you're sending a message that black women cannot lead the box office globally. You're supporting that narrative. I absolutely dislike the ethnic and racial fixation on things.
First of all, dude, focusing on ethnicity is all you do. You saw a black woman in a children's cartoon 5 years ago and lost your mind. But that's beside the point. You acknowledged yourself in the past that films depicting African history with black actors may not be able to sell, to be financially successful. And it's true, that's why we don't see these movies often. But if you want them to make those movies, and when they finally do it, they highlight the fact that they did, why are you criticizing them for it? You even said it yourself. The fact that black people did a movie in Africa is the one good thing you'll say about the movie, but if it's Viola Davis saying it, suddenly they're focusing on ethnicity too much? Get out of here, dude. You are such a hypocrite.
They choose a setting I don't particularly like, but it shouldn't matter according to her, because I need to support the fact that it's ethnic and then it's talking about strong women. Here's the thing. I think it's wrong to look at things that way. It doesn't matter if you look at things that way in the sense that I'll only support white-led movies. No, I think that's wrong. Support well-made movies and support actors based on their skills, not based on their skin tone. Believe it or not, even though this would be a very logical, sensible, and I want to say centrist, if not apolitical position, these days, for some reasons, this has become a far-right position, has it? I don't even know.
Well, no, I wouldn't say it's far-right on its own, but I would say it's ignorant of the broader issues that underline this industry. Again, the whole point, the entire reason this movie took so long to be made is precisely because, one, Hollywood studios did not believe a movie set in Africa with black actors covering black history could make money, and two, because they don't believe white people will watch such movies. It's racism meets the market demand. You, Metatron, might sincerely believe in your heart that you will basically watch any movie set in Africa except this one conveniently, but the fact of the matter is, by not watching this movie and trashing it anyway, you are proving Hollywood's point, that when such movies come out, some white people will complain about it and not watch it. And again, for the 100th time, I'm not saying you have to like this movie, but if you genuinely want to see more of them, you do have to support them, which is also the only thing that Viola Davis was saying in that article. If you wanted a movie on the Kandake or the Zulu or whatever, you would have been far more likely of getting those had the Woman King been more financially successful. That's just a fact. But anyway, let's go back to that article. So again here, I just want to reiterate that Metatron did not read the article and completely mischaracterizes Viola Davis. Like, seriously, read the entire article. The boycotts are never brought up anywhere. The critics are not mentioned. It has nothing to do with the backlash. Now granted, this is also a weak part in my original video because when I got to that part, I was feeling a bit artsy, experimental, and I wanted to do that video essay thing where you have other people read out quotes, and that's what I did using my family. But in doing so, I failed to provide the full context of the article so as to really explain what Viola Davis was saying here. So, to clarify it now, the only thing that article is about, okay? There's this reporter talking to Viola Davis, right? And he says, you know how this type of movie with an all-black cast in Africa, covering African history, with a summer blockbuster budget, how this type of movie is not something we see often? How would you, Viola Davis, feel if this movie, The Woman King, was the beginning of more movies like that? That it becomes the new normal instead of a rare moment? And all Viola Davis says to this is, yeah, that'd be great, but Hollywood only cares about money, so to see more movies like that, they need to be watched, they need to be supported. Otherwise, you'll reinforce Hollywood's previous notions that these movies cannot succeed. That's totally it. No mentions of the criticisms, so like, if you want more movies like these, you have to support them. That's all she said. But Metatron reading an article and injecting his own biased narrative into it is not new. I don't know if it was the first time he did it, but it definitely wasn't the last, and that's what most of my videos on him are about. But finally, we reached the climax. Did Metatron watch the movie? Well, we know the answer, but let's hear it from him fully.
So, what about this idea of this accusation Metatron didn't even watch the movie? So, here is how it went. I'd like to remind anyone who watches this channel is that this channel is a team effort. What this means is that we will choose a few topics, and then I have a bunch of researchers, professionals behind me, PhD, postdoctoral, anthropologist, classicist, Egyptologist, linguist, and they help me carry the load of the channel because I post every single day, try to maintain quality, want to do deep researched content, but produce it quickly, and then it goes to the editors, and then I finish up with my own personal editing touches, which I do every single time. So all of this is a team effort. What this means is that when we are reviewing a movie, or we are reviewing a show, and sometimes when we are reviewing a very long video from another creator, we share the load. So I first watched the trailer, the entire trailer, and I decided, hey, this is worth addressing. So then we found the movie, or sections of the movie, since we didn't want to go to the theater. So it is this part, 15 minutes, another 15 minutes, another 20 minutes, the battle part. We put it all together and we shared it among ourselves. So I watched a few sections. One of my lead historians watched the other. The Egyptologists, the African specialists watched another few things. And then we got together and we decided, hey, what did you find? Oh, you found this. Show me this piece. Show me this other piece, this other part. So did I single-handedly watch the entire movie? No, I didn't. And there is nothing wrong with that. Also because I would have fallen asleep. I watched the trailer. I watched some sections that I deemed important and conclusive. For example, when they scream freedom, 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 that's enough for me to debunk it already. That's enough, particularly if you're familiar with the history. But altogether, we did watch the entire movie. So that is the truth. And people can attack me all they want. Could I have put a different title? Maybe I could have said reaction to the trailer but then again, it is the full movie, so why would I do that? But I didn't watch the entire movie. You don't need to watch the entire movie. Will I ever watch the entire movie? Only if Viola Davis sends me a wire transfer of $10,000. Then I'll watch every single minute of it.
Okay, so Metatron did not watch the movie. And the reason officially is that he was too busy making daily videos, so instead he and his team of academics each watched a portion of the movie and made the video as such. Metatron feels he didn't need to watch the movie because collectively they all had a good understanding of it, and he's okay with that. So that's the video. Metatron didn't respond to me, but he did anyway indirectly. Before we go on, again, I just want to say how funny that actually was. I didn't expect him to actually do a response video like that, but come on! In this video, he mentions the accusations of being a liar and a grifter all by himself, even though he doesn't bring me up, so... Dude, If those were the reasons you didn't want to address me directly, why did you bother bringing up those accusations at all? All this video really did is reinforce the idea that it's not much the arguments that you don't want to address, but me. Not because I was rude and you didn't want to encourage this rhetoric by responding to it because you still brought it up. It just feels like you're afraid of making your audience aware of me more than anything. But anyway, that was the response video. And by having the response, we can go through my core criticisms and see if they still hold true now that we have the response. Starting with, is Metatron lazy with his research? And well, yeah, definitely. As demonstrated multiple times throughout the video, and as I did nearly 2 years ago now, Metatron could not do the absolute barest effort of researching the movie he was talking about by merely watching it. Would you watch a movie review by someone you knew didn't watch the movie? Why would you trust them on anything they say? Similarly, he could have known what the movie was about anyway by reading past the headline of that article, but he never did. He could have looked up the full interview with the actress to see what her and her cast had to say, but he didn't. And now, going back to an older video, he actually had the opportunity to check his research again. And he was still lazy about it. He still didn't watch the movie, he still didn't read the article without injecting his own narrative into it. He didn't do anything. And again, because I know it's easy to think like, well, it's just a woman king, who cares? But it's what he did with that one video 2 years ago. Think for a second about the sheer laziness here, and think about the fact that Metatron has done several hundred more videos since then, and you'll start to understand why I'm hammering on this. So if you want an even deeper look that still barely scratches the surface of everything he's done, just watch my other videos, because this is just a sample. Another claim made by Metatron multiple times is that he will correct himself when presented with counter-arguments that prove him wrong. So is that even true? Not really. He had to bite the bullet on getting the bad guys wrong, but come on. Subliminal message, how dumb do you think your audience is? You unambiguously got the villains wrong 3 times. And you talk about how you got the impression that the white Europeans were the villains from the trailer, but didn't the rest of your team watch other sections of the movie that would have corrected you on that? Actually, we'll get to that question when we talk about the lying. I'm getting ahead of myself here. But the point is, Metatron talks about how he cares about the truth and being corrected if he makes a mistake. And I mean, listen, if you were arrogant and made a video without watching the movie, only to realize you got it completely wrong, wouldn't correcting yourself here include actually watching the movie this time around? I genuinely feel like part of going over your video again and fact-checking yourself should also include going over the sources too. But even if you didn't, you still didn't address most of the arguments presented, you went over the article on Viola Davis but still didn't read it properly, otherwise you would have noticed this time around that her comment was never about the critics or the boycotts, as you suggested for the second time. You chose to take this actress at her out-of-context words, even though I had pointed out that her words don't hold much weight. That was never addressed. You just made the same argument like a counter-argument was never presented at all. So no, I didn't get the impression that he was correcting himself. Every time he doubled down on anything, it was by either ignoring the counter-arguments that were made or not redoing his research correctly. And every time he did acknowledge a mistake, it was only ever minor ones that don't take away from his main arguments, or in the context of him not summarizing the movie completely, he came up with a very stupid excuse for that as well. Another question I raised several times is, does Metatron have a bias against movies made by people of color? And I mean, I made arguments on this issue several times now. I don't think Metatron is like a full-on racist, but I do believe that racism is a spectrum, and people can in fact have racial biases even if they're not full-on white supremacists. And in Metatron's case, he does have a bias. I used to watch Metatron years ago. I've seen him do historical evaluations with other stuff like Vikings and Barbarians. To my knowledge, he's never done a historical review of something he didn't watch, except for The Woman King. You could see those other historical evaluations, and you could tell he watched them because he would reference key points in the story that made it clear he was knowledgeable. Dude has been defending himself for years on the idea that he's not racist, he just wants black people to do movies in Africa instead. And that's what he does when it happens. This treatment was exclusively kept for The Woman King. Oh, and Cleopatra, although granted that one had it coming. But regardless, he's doubling down today, so clearly the bias is still there. That leads us to the final question. Is Metatron a liar? Last year, when I said he lied in the comments under my video, he really didn't like that. So much so, in fact, that it prompted him just a few days after that exchange to have a live stream which he titled, "Let's Talk About Lying, Am I a Liar?" Since he had made it clear at the time that he wouldn't debate me because I used that word, I decided to catch the stream to see what he would have to say. So, what did he have to say?
Whenever they call me a liar, it's really an insult and it's an ad hominem. If I say that this specific emperor wasn't black, I say it because I believe it. So it's not a lie. In order for it to be a lie, even if the statement was wrong and I'm proved wrong, still doesn't make me a liar. To be a lie, there has to be intent, like he's saying, to deceive while you knowingly know that what you're stating is false. Good luck proving that, by the way. In fact, my second riposte would be prove it. Prove it. Absolutely say. That's what I said actually to one of my detractors the other day in the comments section. I'm not going to mention him because I'm not going to mention him. But one of the things I was telling him, kept calling me a liar and saying that I was lying. Same thing, technicality, semantics. Is what at the end of the day, I'm like, I never lied on a video. I never lied on a video because I always present what I believe to be true. Whether you can prove that I was wrong or not, I welcome it. I welcome debunking videos. I welcome response videos. But even if you prove that whatever I said that happened in that specific year, we got it wrong, still not a lie.
And furthermore, in this very video we're covering, the last thing he brings up before giving his explanation for not watching the movie is the lying, saying that if you call him a liar, it's an ad hominem, and it means you have no arguments.
Anytime I see a thumbnail and they call me a liar, I'm like, okay, this person, it's not even going to be challenging. They just demonstrated, without me even clicking, they have demonstrated that they're not capable of presenting a counter-arguments, because if they did, they wouldn't need to call me a liar, they would just debunk me.
And I mean, if you want to get into the crux of it, he's technically right. If you're going to accuse someone of lying, you should be able to prove it. Not just to prove that they are wrong, but that they are purposefully wrong with the intent to mislead. And you know what, Metatron? You totally got me there. Whether you're lying or just wrong, I'm not in your head, I don't see what you're doing off camera, so I couldn't prove it in a court of law. You got me. But I will bite the bullet anyway. You already made it clear you wouldn't respond to me or debate me even before I called you a liar. Even that excuse you brought up earlier in the video, that you don't want to send harassment my way because my channel is too small, this is also something you told me didn't really matter because I called you a grifter and that was your main issue. So I'm just asking myself, like, what do I lose by doubling down myself? Because I do think you're a liar. I think you're full of shit. And while I can't prove it beyond doubts, I can still make arguments for it, starting with this bullshit-ass explanation for why you didn't watch The Woman King. You say you didn't have time because you and your team were busy with daily uploads and doing lots of research. That's not true. You were not doing daily uploads back when you made that video over 2 years ago. At the most, you'd do 3 videos per month. And one of the first videos you did right after was your review of Barbarian Season 2, which you did watch because you're a lot more specific in that review with all the plot points. So you lied about being too busy with daily uploads because there weren't any, and you lied about the lack of time because you had plenty of time to binge a show for a different video like right after. I also don't believe you had a team back then, or rather, maybe you had a few collaborators occasionally helping you, but none in that video. Again, if you had, one of them would have told you by watching the movie that the bad guys are the Oyo at some point. But what this excuse really is about spreading the blame around. Understand, I'm doing these videos on my own, right? I'll have my girlfriend sometimes watch my videos before I upload them, but that's usually for anything from weird cuts, weird audio, not peer review, nothing like that. And I don't have any degrees on history, sociology either, like I'm not educated. But you, Metatron, you have a team of academics, and if I'm not mistaken, you said that you went to school extensively, right? So if I follow your logic, you and your entire team of academics put together could not get the plot of a single action movie right. The only reason I got a better understanding of The Woman King than all of you combined is because I watched it. But that's assuming I believe your whole team effort excuse, which I don't. I just think you're putting the blame on your team instead of owning up to it yourself. You didn't express yourself poorly with the subliminal nonsense either. That's also bullshit. You didn't watch the movie, you were lazy and arrogant, and you got the villains wrong. That's it. Either you screwed up or your entire team screwed up. And I'm not blaming your team here, I'm blaming you. This is your channel, your name, your face on it. You were on your own, you just had to watch a movie, and you didn't. Even the second half of the original video, where you go over what the actual history of the Kingdom of Dahomey was, as I demonstrated in my video responding to it, the things you describe as being the real history of Dahomey are things that the movie depicted. Had you watched the movie, you would have seen that, and your historical evaluation would have been all the better for it. But that would have required approaching the movie in good faith, which you didn't. You did not approach it in good faith back then, and you didn't now either. You are doubling down on being willfully ignorant, and you're lying to cover the embarrassment. And again, that's not because of me. You chose not to address me directly or mention me by name. So whether you're a liar or not, whether you're a moderate or a right-wing grifter who doesn't want to admit to himself that he's a right-wing grifter, none of that should matter at all. You had the opportunity to go over an old video on your own terms, and to be honest with your laziness and arrogance, to do the proper research this time, and to come clean. Instead, you double down on it, not because you're correct, but because doubling down in all caps is more in line with the truth crusader persona that you've created for yourself, which in turn indicates that this perceived image you have of yourself is more important to you than the actual truth. So feel free to pretend like because I called you a liar, virtually nothing I said in this video has any value anymore, because we both know it's easier to do that than to actually respond. But I can live with it. As far as I was concerned, I had already said everything I had to say about you in my previous videos. What your response did, at the very least, is confirmed the fact that you're not all about the historical, factual truth as you've claimed to be countless times. What you have demonstrated even clearer is that you're a lying coward. Now, was that rude enough for you? Are you going to assemble the shield wall and defend your good name this time around? Well, feel free to debate me, either in public or in private, whatever you like, and I might just take it all back. But I guess that's it then. That's the end of the Woman King debacle, and unless Metatron makes a real response video, this time, I should be completely done. But yeah, that's about it. Took me a while to motivate myself into doing this video, but I find in the end I'm always down for more clowning on this guy. I do mean it when I say that I used to love Metatron. Way back in the earlier days, there was a charm in the low-quality videos of a guy who was just very passionate about the stuff he was talking about. And I do think, unfortunately today, that separating the content creators you watch from their politics is becoming ever more difficult. But I want to make it clear, Metatron leaning to the right is not my criticism. It's never been. It's really how he dresses it up as this fighter for the absolute truth in this perceived woke post-truth society that I think is cringe, dishonest, and effectively a pipeline into the right wing. I do think it's worth analyzing and talking about it, which is also why you'll probably never hear me, for example, talking about Shad. Because even if Shad is much further to the right, there's no attempt to disguise his rhetoric with any kind of cultish persona. He just says he's right-wing and that he likes AI art. And he complains about the woke on his second channel. I disagree with everything he says, but I have nothing to add. But I'm just rambling now. So, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.